So I think I've timed it right. I'm getting used to this recording studio stuff here in Substack. But well, for me, I would say good morning. I don't know exactly when you're receiving this, but I did want to do a video for this series, When the Future Won't Hold, because I will not be doing any of the Google Notebook summaries of these pieces. I've kind of explained it in the preface article, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit because I think it's important to kind of frame what's happening, why this kind of, I don't know, dark turn, I guess, in my recent articles and so on. But so I come on today, I spend a few minutes, and from that standpoint, kind of catch you up on what's going on beyond chatting with Kathy and those things, but. There is something I think that happens in the autistic mind and in the Gestalt processing mind where I think the industry, psychiatry calls it passive suicidality and whatnot. So here, I guess, is your trigger warning. This is an active discussion. I'm fine. I'm tired. It's the beginning of our spring break, but I am tired and I am a bit burnt out by things and events in the world, and I suspect a lot of people are, especially autistic people. But I've been dealing with a lot in my life and in my profession, counseling students and managing their IEPs and helping them navigate the end of their secondary school and going into a world that is increasingly dangerous. And so I wanted to kind of do some more auto theory where there's not a lot of research about what I'm writing in this series to come when the future won't hold, because it's all psychiatry talking about, how to pull yourself up and stiff upper lip and, get on with life and produce and all of these kinds of things. But I introduce kind of a new script from my professional life, this collapse of futurity, where you cannot see a future and what that means. And you're probably listening to this and thinking, what do you mean you cannot see a future? And so I'll explain it like this. I have 17 and 18-year-olds on my caseload that when they started secondary school 40 years ago, the situation was that you could go to college, you could get financial aid, you could choose from a variety of majors, whatever interested you. You could, if you needed to, borrow money from the government at a fairly decent rate. And then after you graduated, you would have 6 months to find a job, find suitable income, and then payments would start against that loan at a reasonable price. And so that's how these students began. And then slowly and then very quickly, all of that changed. And so what does that do in the mind? What meanings do we make from that? And I know in my writings, I talk a lot about the power threat meaning framework. But in this case, power, the government, has created the threat in our lives. They have changed things. They've changed terms of the deal. And so now there is a new regime at college that begins in the next term. So for my seniors who are graduating now and going off to college, they'll face this new regime. The interest on loans has doubled, now 13%. There is no period of time at which, after you graduate or after you leave college, there's no 6 months and then you pay. As soon as you take out the loan, as soon as it's disbursed into your college to pay for things, 30 days later, you get a bill, right? The college has received the full amount and then you must start paying. So for California State University, the average costs, at retail pricing, that's about $200 a month in your first year. And then in your second year, You add on the next one, and that's so roughly 400. And then in your third year, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time you're in your fourth year, um, you're paying almost $1,000 a month in student loans, and you haven't eaten, you haven't been housed, you haven't done all of these things. So a lot of students are looking at that collapse of futurity. Everything I've been working towards requires a bachelor's degree, but I don't see a path to that because my family's not wealthy. And prices have gotten so ridiculous that there is no part-time job that you can work and have full-time school. So what does that mean? What do I do now? Right. And in California, we have some very good community colleges that can handle the first 2 years. But the first 2 years does not get you a bachelor's degree. So trade schools are there. And so people are changing their lives entirely. A next generation will not be able to borrow their way onto a medical degree or a law degree. So very brilliant children who wanted to be a veterinarian, but their family is not wealthy, will not be, because you cannot work enough to pay off graduate school, because graduate school in and of itself is a full-time job. So all of these things kind of go into where we are. And when you're talking about teenagers and all of a sudden the realities are kicking in, oh man, I made all these plans, but now I don't know. I don't know what's next. I don't know what to do. I think it's very cruel. And so we're processing a lot of this stuff going on, which the previous series kind of deals with the emotional cost to the practitioner, myself and others that are in this place. You know, the spoon cost of dealing as an attuned person, as an alexithymic person, as an empathic autistic person, of working with students, clients, customers, whatever, who all of a sudden face a world that has drastically changed. My cost to get to work has increased by more than 25% in the span of a month, simply because this country is at war with that country and all of the economic ramifications of that. And so what do you do when you say, I don't have a choice? I don't know what to do next. I don't see a future. And so today's piece, When the Future Won't Hold, kind of talks about that. But again, I wanted to come on and kind of explain where this is coming from, and you know, my trigger warnings and all of that. I wanted to kind of preface. I also wanted to say kind of, I don't know, humorously or something, but I did put the first piece into Notebook, and then it gave me a very weird version of the summary. And then I put the other pieces in, and it was the same pattern, right? And then I put some other stuff in there, and it was normal. And so I think there were some guardrails at play, because it does talk about, you know, suicidality, passive suicidality, and issues around, you know, these kind of future things, not active participation in the end, but I think there were some things in the Gemini algorithm that said, no, we must not help anybody with that. And so from that standpoint, I said, well, I'm not going to give a product that I think is terrible, because that's what I was experiencing, kind of disconnect between what I saw and what I had written. And so again, I'm coming on maybe a bit of live, a bit of a live read of When the Future Won't Hold. You may have noticed that my writing has taken a certain style lately. I'm a Gestalt processor. I'm whole to part in everything I do. And when I get very emotional, I tend to get lyrical. I tend to get kind of poetic. And so these pieces lately, across both Substacks, have been poem first. The poem comes first to me, and then I write it, I do some touch-ups, and I sit with it a bit, and I think to myself, well, what does this mean? what just came out, right? And sometimes I think, wow, I cannot believe that's in there. And so from that standpoint, I write the field notes. Like I do the analysis for you, the critique for you. And this is what's going on in my mind right now. And then once I have all of that, then I can do a little introduction about what this is. So that's the reason behind the formatting. It's again in the kind of auto theory, autoethnography side of things. I'm not critiquing someone else's research because there is none. No one's talking about this. The naysayers are far behind me in the rearview mirror. And so now I'm to the point where I'm just documenting this in the moment and presenting it, and hopefully it resonates with people. And maybe there'll be some research down the road, but I don't know how that would work. I don't know how we would draw an appropriate sample to meet that gold standard and stuff. So a lot of my work, going back to the journal paper, as auto theory, as writing, with theoretical constructs, right? With the PTMF in there, with choice theory in there as a theoretical construct. But auto theory, again, I am a sample size of one, and here's what I'm experiencing, and I'm finding that some resonate with what I'm writing, and it helps them a bit. And so I I know that if I'm helping one person, I'm fine. I'm going to keep going. And so part of this is not inspiration porn or anything like that, but just to let people know you're not alone, right? That without being sad or sappy or melodramatic or whatever, I wanted to kind of document and give some scripts if they become necessary, so that you're not alone in any of this, right? And so I guess from that point, I'll read it to you, the poem that I came up with to start this series. It's called When the Future Won't Hold. There are days when the future does not feel terrible as much as absent. Not a fire, not a cliff edge, not the sharp, bright theatre of crisis language, just a thinning, a loosening at the far edge of the shelf. The calendar still hangs where it hung yesterday. The pension statement still arrives. The planner still opens to its pale little squares. The world continues to its brisk administrative breathing, deadlines, renewals, projections, those neat and hopeful violences. But somewhere underneath, the thread that ties now to later has gone slack. And because nothing dramatic has happened, because the body is still upright, because the dishes may even be washed, because one can still answer an email or smile at that grocery queue, or discuss the weather with a neighbor, or as if the weather were the only atmosphere that mattered. The absence goes unnamed. And it's easy from the inside to call this disorganization, to say, you should really make a plan. You should really think long term. You should open a spreadsheet, set some goals, build a morning routine, buy a nicer planner. Download the app with the cheerful little badges that congratulate you for surviving in the approved order. But some of us have lived too long in worlds that did not keep their promises. Some of us learned early that the future was not a place one entered by diligence, only by luck, only by masking, only by becoming smaller, only by making oneself more legible to systems that could not love us but could perhaps tolerate our approximation. After enough years of that, the future can begin to feel less like destination and more like a room that keeps moving farther down the hall. There are other days when it's not even the future that disappears, but you. Not as death exactly, not always. Sometimes as fog, sometimes as tunnel, sometimes as the animal wish to stop being reachable, to slip sideways out of demand, to become unfindable to calendars, no to inboxes, to institutions, to the 1,000 tiny hands that keep tugging the sleeve of the self and calling it responsibility. Sometimes what rises is not, I want to die, but something stranger, older, harder to confess in a culture that only knows how to hear alarm or compliance. I cannot keep going and being in conditions like this. And sometimes, let us be honest enough and gentle enough to say it plain, sometimes the wish leans further, not towards spectacle, not towards declaration, not even toward plan, just towards surrender, toward not waking, toward letting go by not reaching, toward the quiet mathematics of the body too tired to keep arguing with the terms of its own continuum. There is a language for some of this and not enough language for the rest. There are clinical phrases that can open doors and close them, words that can bring care or panic, witness or surveillance, shelter or capture. There are also older knowledges, the need to vanish for a while, the need to go still, the need to become opaque, the need to be missing without being mourned as lost. Not every disappearance is an ending. Not every ending arrives with warning lights. Not every empty planner is a failure of character. Sometimes it's a smooth place in the dark, a silence where futurehood used to live, a sacred refusal, a temporary unmaking, a nervous system laying down its tools because the cost of building a viable path has exceeded what remains. This begins there, not as certainty, not in diagnostics, not in tidy categories, but in the field, in the places where forward thins, in the moments when the self goes dim, on the soft and frightening edges between withdrawal and surrender, between rest and disappearance, between opacity and oblivion, between not like this and not at all. If you've known these rooms, you may recognize them. If you've not, walk gently. Some of us have had to learn that survival is not always a march toward brightness. Sometimes it's a pause, sometimes a vanishing act. Sometimes the refusal to offer one more polished version of the self to a world that keeps asking for continuity without ever asking what it costs. And sometimes the first mercy is simply this: to speak of those states without immediately turning them into evidence against the one who lives them. So yes, as I take a breath, there is a heaviness that is happening in the world, in my life, professionally. But I'm okay. I am no threat. I'm not in danger on these things. But I do honestly, earnestly believe that these things that will follow, these pieces that will follow, need to be said. They need to be out there. Right? None of this is driving anybody anywhere. Nobody is being induced by my words. But if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say things, right? When I buy a planner and I don't use it, right? Is that the ADHD, or is that I don't see a point? I don't see a future, right? When I wish to disappear, what does that mean? Right? As opposed to, like, I don't want to end things. I just don't want them to go on like this. How do we say those things? And so a lot of this is exploring that. You know, I dive in to Chronos and Kairos, right? How does somebody who lives almost entirely in Kairos in their mind exist in Chronos, in the progression of time, in calendar, in appointments, and, you know, returning emails on a prompt time and all that? What happens, right? I borrow a bit from my flash fiction and talk about Johatsu, the night movers, and what that means and what people are actually doing. And so from that standpoint, we'll go down that road. And please, if you need help, go get it. If you need to reach out, please do. I think I'm pretty good about answering messages when people directly message me. I keep the comments on the articles to paid members, mainly because if I don't, it will fill with spam, and I can manage that. I don't have time for that. But I'm very easy to find through the messaging system on Notes. You can find me if you have a question, and you can reach out, and I will do my best to get back to you within sometimes a few hours, depending on where you are in the world. But I think going forward in the world, we autistics, we Gestalt processors, we need to build communities. We need to build a commons where we can come together and support one another. And so for this moment, I'm offering my message space in Substack as a place that we can begin until we do that in the physical sense. But yes, I did want to come and explain, I think better than I have in the preface piece, that the future is so different than when I started the Substack. And I think the mission of the outside has changed as well. From railing at the naysayers and critiquing papers and stuff to writing papers and doing auto theory. And I'm encouraged that there are others, autistics, Gestalt processors, that are beginning to do the same thing. And I'm very happy to support as much as I can. And so from that standpoint, I think I've gone on long enough. Hopefully this works. This will be my second recording studio effort. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. It means the absolute world to me that you read these things and that they're valuable to you, and you share that with me in comments, and you share these things with your friends and professional groups. That means the world to me. And I say things like I'm just a wee school teacher, and indeed I do mean that, right? I never thought that storing gestalts in the cloud would lead to this, but it has. And so I have to be responsible with it. And so I hope you don't mind. But with that, then good day.